My name is Matthew Hayward. I'm presenting my project for the Advanced Deep Learning course. I chose a project on agentic AI, and I decided to simulate a courtroom environment, and I've called it VerdictAI. So I jokingly say in the report that I'm looking to alleviate humans of the bothersome tasks of having to make decisions and argue their points. What I'm really aiming to do is to simulate a courtroom environment where there's an prosecution and a defense, so an antagonistic agentic system, and then finally a pass off to a judge agent that can weigh up the case made, the evidence, and with precedents can determine guilt and also advise on a sentence. And we'll see how I get to that. So the foundation of this this VerdictAI is a multi-agent LLM and orchestration system. So what that means is I'm going to call multiple agents, and I'm going to feed the output of one into the other. So that's where we're going to get this antagonistic relationship. And you can see this piece of code here, incredibly simple. I think I took it directly from the lecture. It's just making a call to OpenAI's chat completion through the OpenAI API. And we're assuming a role for the system, and then we're providing a prompt. So this will be case information, what the opponent said, etc. So here's the main schematic of VerdictAI. It gives you an idea of the flow. What we have on the left is the alleged crime. So this might be robbed a car, stole from a shop, committed a bank robbery, or a bank robbery was committed. So it's a statement of the crime. And then a text file, which is the evidence. So this could be like a police report, or it could be imagined to be a police report. So forensics, eyewitness statements, alibis, etc. And what's happening here is these two sets of information through the prompt creation are fed into our OpenAI agents. So we'll see in the next slide how this prompt is built. And these are our two attorney agents, and they're going into the courtroom. So you can actually kind of in your head visualize these two little individuals walking into the courtroom. And what's happening here is we're seeing 3 successive rounds of argumentation. So the arguments coming in, there's no precedence, no one's made an argument yet. So what's happening first is we're having the prompt for our agent has empty arguments, but has the evidence and the alleged crime. And they're told, you're a legal prosecutor, make an argument for why this individual is guilty. Those arguments are returned. The argument is appended under prosecution, and also at the same time, the text argument is being read out through a TTS system. So it's kind of in real time, kind of fun to see the argument being made and said out loud. We'll see in the next couple of slides, I give these different personalities just to kind of keep the interest in following along with the argument. Then this is fed in with the prompt into the defender. So now we've got an argument from the prosecutor, we have all the information, and we go into the defender, same again, we're getting text-to-speech out, that should be up there. And then the argument is appended under defense. And you can see, as long as we're not in the 3rd round, or we haven't completed 3 rounds, we're going around this loop, and the arguments are building, and there's this antagonism. Once we hit 3 loops, the full transcript is passed off to this judge prompt. So the judge prompt assembles all the arguments made so far. I'll explain what this is in a minute, because conceptually it's kind of interesting. What I do is I actually provide a real case from the real world where there was a sentence, and it's a very similar crime. So if it was a shop robbed, then this would be someone who was sentenced for robbing a shop. And what the judge does is there's a script that scrapes this URL. The judge takes in this information too, along with all the argumentation. And if a verdict of guilty is reached, then what happens is the judge will use this precedence to determine a sentence. The judge is told through the prompt that they're fair, which I thought I had that as a funny addition. And then the outcome is read out again. And what are the outputs? So we'll see in the prompt in a second that I have a verdict, have the reasoning, and I have a confidence score in that verdict. So I want the judge to tell me how confident they are in the verdict that they've made. And the reasoning, again, is read out through text-to-speech. And then finally, the verdict and the alleged crime is fed into DALL-E through the ChatGPT API again to produce a courtroom sketch. So if you're from like the UK or any other country where cameras are not allowed in the courtroom, you're familiar with these sketches. That this part didn't work so great, but it does produce some actually hilarious results. So I'd say this is like the meat of the antagonism, the agents. This is the prompt. So you can see here we have three prompt, I suppose you'd call them like skeletons or like frameworks. We have the prosecutor, the defense, and the judge. So you can see here the case facts. So that's that one sentence descriptor. A shop was robbed. The evidence, and we'll see in a minute, this can be quite elaborate actually. This can be time, places, eyewitness statements. The argument. So obviously for the first round, the prosecutor is not going to receive an argument, but after this, it's going to get appended. So you're going to see the defense's arguments build here. The agent's behavior, so what they're supposed to achieve, and then the word limit. This was a fantastic thing to play around with. I limited the word limit for early runs to very few. So we're talking like 40 or 50. 40 and 50 words wasn't enough to actually encompass the full argument. So I would find that they started to repeat themselves in the rounds, but as this number increased and I got to 150, you start to see between the rounds of the argumentation, like the rounds of the trial, if you would, some interesting behaviors emerge. We won't go into super detail. I'll show a demo, but as you can imagine, 3 blocks of 150 words is too much to read out. And then finally, the judge prompt, and this bit I'm quite proud of actually. So what I've got here is I can say based on the judge, I've told the judge based on the transcript, so that's the full transcript of the whole trial, and that newspaper article that was scraped. You can, well actually the newspaper article doesn't come in just yet, but based on the transcript, determine guilt, not guilty, undecided, or mistrial. So it returns, the very first thing it will return is just a single word. And that's what I chop off and send to DALL-E for my image. I want reasoning, and I want references to the transcript. And also, if a sentence of guilt is found, they're found guilty, I want that newspaper article that was digested to be incorporated, and I want the sentence to be determined from that. And then finally, the confidence score, which I think was a cool addition. You'll see like I've had cases where it was like a 5, so it's kind of unsure, but I've had cases where it was like an 8 or 9, so the agent was very confident in the judgment. Again, limited to 150 words, and at this point it's more just to save us from listening to a robot voice for ages. So I'll just go through a few of the helper scripts. I think this is the TTS one. Nothing crazy complex here, but I thought I would just point out that I actually gave them all different voices. Pardon me. So it adds a little bit of character to the whole process. I also found that I had to speed up the voice. In the end, I went for 200, but listening to these massive essays produced on the fly was exhausting during debugging. So that's the TTS module. And then for determining the sentence, as I mentioned, this just uses Beautiful Soup. And what this is doing is taking the URL, so you can see, I think this is from The Sun or some trashy tabloid newspaper. There's a sentence, 5 years for robbery, and there's an article. So it takes the whole URL and digests it. So very, very simple, but I think it was kind of a nice addition. And then the courtroom sketch. So this is just a call to DALL-E and then a block of code to save it so that I could display the image during knitting. But yeah, very simple. It just takes the verdict and the context and tries to make an image. I ran some really silly ones that I presented the 2-minute slide, but I had UFOs flying all over the place and I had people crying and stuff. It was kind of a fun addition. So here's the main engine of the Verdict AI. So this is the main function that's getting called to call all the other sub-functions. What we see at the top is just processing of the evidence. So that's pulling in the articles, chunking them, and having them ready to feed in to ChatGPT. To the prompt. The prompt goes to ChatGPT. This is the debate engine. That's what I would call it, or the debate part. So this is the 3 successive rounds, or I mean, you could apply 5 or 6 or however many you want. I chose 3. And you can see the call to the prosecutor to format the prompt. So it's pulling all these pieces of information in together and adding in the defense's previous statement or the further down the prosecutors. So the first call is to the prosecutor. We get the reply, we append it to the history. We then provide that response to the defense. So you can see I'm calling it down there. Obviously for the first one, if we haven't been through a round yet, we don't have anything to call. And then you can see how we're going through here. We're getting the history. Then we're doing print of the round. We're getting text to speech. So the judge actually calls the round of the debate. And then we have the prosecutor and the defense. And again, we're getting the TTS in there. And then we compile all the history at the end of after all rounds are finished, all the history gets compiled together under prosecutor and defense so that the judge knows who's who. And then finally, the judge prompt gets produced. We have a call to OpenAI and we have the TTS again. And then that's just the call to DALL-E for the cool little sketch that gets spat out. So let's do a quick demo. I call this Punch Up at a Wedding, reference to a Radiohead song. And you can see it's very simple to call VerdictAI. We just have the context, punch up at a wedding. We have the evidence text file, which is this here. I'm not going to read that out, but you can see there's time information, there's eyewitnesses. A reference to a article from the Metro UK tabloid where a big fight happened at a wedding, like a whole family basically fought each other. And then you can see the call to VerdictAI. This shows the first round of the debate. I mean, not to read it all out loud, but you can see there's references to intoxication, eyewitnesses. You can see that it's actually pretty compelling, and I think the defense and the prosecutors, they both actually assume their roles very well. They make reference to each other's arguments, and then again, if you want to pause and read it, I'm not suggesting you do, but if you did, you can see that the arguments build, they're going back and forth, they're kind of pleading with the judge. I think it's quite fun. And the first few times I ran it was very entertaining, but after a while I had to pause the TTS because it was a lot of robot voice. And then finally, the verdict was guilty for this one. I like to show this one because it brings in this external tabloid article. So you can see this is the actual article referenced in the call. And this whole family had a punch up. They got months in prison. And you can see that the verdict coming from the reasoning, both cases and both sides of the arguments are mentioned. And then it's kind of all summarized up. The sentencing is also justified, which I think is really cool. And you can see this person gets 2 years in prison. So that's actually more than these people on the right got in this newspaper article. And the judge is very confident in that argument. So I think this is very cool. And it was nice to see it all come together. I'm very impressed with OpenAI's agentic capacities. And then finally, this is the courtroom sketch that came out, the mixture of wedding, trial, and guilty. So you can see this together, like it's some people getting married, but they're in a courtroom. So I thought that was kind of cool. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening. And I'll look forward to answering any questions in the live presentation. Cheers. Thank you.